Welcome to Lesson 2 of our Principles of Design Thinking course. At its core, design thinking is a problem-solving tool, and our goal is to help you become really comfortable using it. To help you practice this skill, we've identified a challenge for students to address that we believe can be applicable to pretty much any community in the world. That challenge is, how might we reduce reliance on single-use plastic in our community? Single-use plastics, also called disposable plastics, are plastics that are used just once and immediately thrown away. One of the greatest strengths of design thinking is its ability to help us take big, meaty problems and develop actionable solutions. We're going to use this lesson to give you a little primer on the challenge we've chosen. To do this, we've brought in Brad Verter, who is the director of the Mass Green Network.
Plastic is made up of smaller compounds called polymers, and they all have ridiculous sounding names, things like polyethylene, terephthalate, more commonly PET, a very common plastic, polyvinylidene chloride, polyethylene, polypropylene, and they're all lousy. We don't want any of them. Polystyrene, which is one of the most common plastics, especially in foodware, and that's just the crisp polystyrene. If you puff it up, then it becomes styrofoam. Plastic is accruing at a horrifying rate. One of the great problems of plastic is that it doesn't biodegrade, so no plastic does that. So instead of biodegrading, what it'll do is break up into tiny pieces called microplastics. Microplastics is one of the greatest threats to the environment today. What happens is that they leach into the groundwater, or maybe they go into a stream some other way and find their way into the ocean, where they displace plankton. And little fish that eat the plankton get eaten by bigger fish, which get eaten by bigger fish, and so on up the food chain. Those microplastics are, because of this complex food chain, are entering back into our bodies, and that's extremely alarming. And that's just the microplastics. Think about the macroplastics, these big chunks of things. Again, so much of that ends up in the ocean as marine debris, where it lasts forever. This question of ocean debris is horrifying. Not only do you have this the stuff that sits there forever, but the stuff that floats has created these enormous islands of plastic that are floating around, and it's extremely dire. And that's just the environmental problems. We live in a society that is accustomed to throwing everything away. There's virtually no product that's made large scale that does not include plastic. This camera that I'm talking to is half plastic. Our cars are 40% plastic. The single-use plastic, of course, the worst of all. We use it once, we toss it away, and we're just creating a tremendous mess. Take the plastic bag, for example, the grocery bag. That is used for only about 12 minutes on average. And there was no plastic grocery bags really until the late 60s, early 70s. Water bottles, again, not invented till the late 70s. So there's so much of these things that we've become so dependent upon, used so quickly, and then the results of that, the refuse, the garbage we live with for the rest of eternity. There's also these health effects. We can take polystyrene, for example, is a carcinogen, or a likely carcinogen. That styrene leaches into our food when it's hot. If you pour hot coffee into a styrofoam cup, then you're really putting yourself at risk, because the heat releases little tiny styrene molecules, and that gets into our food and gets into our bodies. 100% of the cells in our body, or the fat cells in our body, have traces of styrene. There's sort of a changing of consciousness that has to go along with this sort of, with innovation. And I see them really as going side by side. And I think that once people come up with new innovative solutions, people will also realize, hey, that's a really good idea. And sort of that will be a way of raising consciousness. Reduce, reuse, and recycle. And those are in order of importance. The most important one, in other words, is to reduce, to try to stop one's use of disposable products. The second best option is to reuse. In other words, to try to find, say, Tupperware It's made out of plastic, but people usually don't throw it out right away. They wash it a couple of times until it gets yellow and brittle, and then they throw it away. And then finally, recycle. And recycle is what's touted the most, in terms of the public message, perhaps. But it's actually, of those 3 R's, recycling is probably the least effective. It's not the best solution. Recycling takes a lot of money. It involves a lot of resources. There's a lot of sort of shipping things back and forth. If you want to think about, say, the reducing the carbon footprint of your activities, then it's much better to reduce and reuse than to recycle. Another thing would be to help people to realize how much they're using. The average grocery store spends over $1,000 a week on disposable plastic bags. And of course, we think about those plastic bags as free. The grocery store knows that isn't free, and they have to recoup that cost somehow, so that cost gets passed down to the consumer. Every piece of plastic that has ever been made is still with us, and we're just making more and more of it. There's no way that our planet can sustain this. We're poisoning the oceans, we're filling up our landfills. Hey, you saw WALL-E, right? Remember those opening scenes of the planet just piled with garbage? That's what we're making right now, and it's time to stop.